lecture. I'm going to start off by just running through the weekly to-do list really quickly and then get us rolling on this week's lecture, which revolves around coming up with a working thesis and beginning that process of crafting an argument for the next section of the essay because that's what we just gotta kind of do is we'll start doing that. You've got to finish that literature review, and for those of you still working on that, just remember that a literature review is a survey of the scholarly sources on your specific topic. It provides an overview of current knowledge, allowing you to identify relevant theories, methods, and gaps in the existing research. So a good literature review, you don't just summarize your sources, you analyze, synthesize, and critically evaluate and give a clear picture of the state of knowledge on the subject. And like I said, you're just there contextualizing and giving the reader of the next part like a base of knowledge to come into your argument with, so that they're not just coming in uninformed and blind. So when doing that literature review, just keep in mind that it is that summary of the sources you've done. It provides an overview of it, the current topic. It talks about where experts agree, where they disagree, where there are any gaps in the research, anything like that. You will do a peer review, that literature review is due this Sunday, but for this time being, you have till Wednesday to do the peer review of your literature review, of your assigned partner's literature review. There is a peer review sheet in Module 7 that'll help you fill it out, attach it to the comments section, and then attach your comment in the section where you downloaded it so that it is found there for them. It's different than it was last year, and maybe they've just changed it. I'm going to look into it and see what I can do to fix that, but if not, we're just going to have to roll with it. But anyways, you have till Wednesday to do that. Then you have till Sunday to revise that literature review. Saturday, you will be turning in this discussion board post that kind of revolves around Chapter 6, this lecture, and getting the ball rolling for the next set, so you can just kind of go into that while you're waiting for the feedback on the literature review. And I don't think I stated it, and I'll restate it this Wednesday in class, but because you revise this in the next section, I will give you like a 2% bump to this score once you've revised and turned in that final portfolio. That's what I'm usually doing. Or is it 3%? I think it's 3%. I'll give you a 3% bump for the revisions to the next one, assuming that like you did the revisions according to what is significantly revised, you'll get the bump. Anyways, we can talk about that later. Let's move on to Chapter 6 because this deals with formulating and developing a thesis. An academic writing explores complex issues that grow out of relevant, timely conversations in which something is at stake, and we've been kind of harping on that, and that's why the subjects you have are what you have. Whereas if you'll notice in 101, you may have gotten to do like a cultural artifact that wasn't really timely and relevant. This has to be timely and relevant, and that's what we're trying to get you guys to do. Readers expect you as an academic writer to take a clear and specific logical stand on an issue, and they will evaluate how you support your claims and anticipate counter arguments. So that's what I as a reader will be looking for. What you do is you create what is called a thesis statement or a thesis for your essay. And what a thesis statement is, and I hate this about these guys, is they have this bolded, but like I can't hover over it and get a definition of it. I have to go look it up myself. But anyways, dictionary.com has the best for a thesis or a thesis statement, because a thesis statement is a short sentence, usually one sentence. It summarizes the main point or claim of an essay, research paper, whatever, and is developed, supported, and explained in a text by means of examples and evidence. So as you will see, what they talk about here, that's the best definition. That is what a thesis is. And what they talk about is a thesis makes an assertion that is clearly defined, focused, and supported throughout your essay. That's what you're trying to do. A thesis reflects an awareness of the conversation from which the writer has taken up the issue. So you're going to have to be able to contextualize your thesis, as we're going to talk about later. It is placed at the beginning of an essay, not necessarily the very first sentence, usually in the last sentence of the first paragraph, or maybe the last sentence of a fifth paragraph if you're doing a really crazy long thesis like I will have to do. Like my introduction for that will be 5 pages ish long or more. And you'll see the example here that they use is very long, and we're going to kind of skip over that and go to the shorter one because it'll be what you're modeling. Yeah, your thesis runs through the paragraph like a skewer in a shish kebab. I like that. Or it's a thread that binds the whole paper together. You can think of it like that. It's your thesis should acknowledge the points of view that differ from the writer's own, reflecting the complexity of the issue. It should demonstrate an awareness of readers' assumption and anticipate possible counter arguments. Like we said, that's something that you will be trying to do. It conveys a significant and fresh perspective. That's what I was trying to say, with not just echoing what the authors you read said. You're going to have to try to bring something new, fresh to that argument. You're either going to be filling in like a gap of knowledge, correcting a misinterpretation. You're going to be like modifying the word. You're going to be modifying something, or you're going to be like hypothesis testing. Hypothesis testing you guys might not be doing as much as the first three. Here I like that they say that like you don't typically come up with your thesis and then write your essay. Like your thesis usually comes along as you develop, is developed throughout your process of writing. Like you're using issue based questions to read, to learn, and then you're developing your thesis through the process of writing, and then through revising and discussing your ideas, you eventually hone your thesis, and then you make sure it threads throughout every paragraph of your final draft, and then yeah. Yeah, and then as it says here is like for the most writers, the thesis comes like the really clearly defined thesis will come at the end. You usually have like that working or tentative thesis, and we'll get to that here in a second. And then you kind of go from there. Let's go to the next one. Yeah, so I think the next one is actually the working thesis versus the definitive. So like a working thesis isn't really your final one. It's more of a well formulated question. Or no, the well formulated question you did will help you kind of get your working thesis. That's your first attempt at asserting your position. Like the example they use here is they're talking about the Barbie doll, and this student thought that she would be looking at developing an argument on the need for change for Barbie's beauty standards. But as yeah, so so that the Barbie's unattainable proportions would have damaging effects on women's self-image. That's what she originally thought she was going to write, and you can see that by this quote here: the harmful implications of ongoing exposure to these unattainable ideals, such as low self-esteem, eating disorders, unhealthy body image, and acceptance of violence, make urgent the need for change. So she wants to talk about changing the ideas around her unattainable body image. But then, as you can see here, like the student, the research took her in a more interesting direction to look at the broader idea of femininity is created culturally and how it is created and reinforced by society. And then, as you can see, like her thesis is much more defined that although evidence may be provided to argue that gender is an innate characteristic, I will show that it is actually the result of one's actions, which are then labeled masculine or feminine according to society's definitions of ideal gender. Furthermore, I will discuss the communication of such definitions through the media, specifically in music videos, on TV, and in magazines, and the harmful implications of being exposed to these ideals. So as you can see here, instead of arguing for change, the student decided to show readers how they were being manipulated by the society around them through music videos, through this and through that, and all the things that are labeled masculine or feminine, and how those are constructs of society. And then she wants to leave it up to them to what actions to take. And that's, as you can see, I think a far more compelling paper. Instead of just looking at one thing and being like, you're the problem, it looks at the broader social implications, and that's something you may want to be doing when you're looking at yours. as for like you're developing a week, you'll be working in these four models primarily, and probably until you get into like the harder sciences, you won't be working in the fourth one that much. So the first model you could be working in is the correcting misinterpretations model. This model is used to correct writers um, whose arguments you believe have misconstrued one or more important aspects of an issue. These theses usually take the form of a factual claim, and this is actually a good example. Although scholars have addressed curriculum to explain low achievement in schools, they have failed to fully appreciate the impact of limited resources to find up-to-date textbook quality teachers and computers. Therefore, reform in schools must focus on economic need as well as curriculum. So, as you can see here, what they're saying is that um, the previous scholars have all just looked too much on how curriculum affects um, how well a student does or student performance, and not looking at economic need and how schools are being impacted by the limited resource. And I think this is something that we can all agree has been of note more recently in the past few decades. But as you can see, that's what they're doing, is they're saying, while looking at this, they fail to look at this. So that would be your way of developing a working thesis, is not is in this sort of model would be telling people this is where we're going to look instead, and show how you're going to be adding to the conversation and correcting a misinterpretation, or adding to a gap in research. This is almost the same as a gap in research as well, but they're talking about connecting the two. Yeah. Another one would be filling the gap model. So the gap model points out what other writers may have overlooked or ignored in discussing a given issue. You usually make a claim of value in a gap model. This one talks about cultural diversity in the United States. They talk about if America is truly a melting pot of cultures, as it is often called, then why is it that stories and events seem only to be in black and white? Why is it that when history courses are taught about the period of civil rights movement, only the memories of African Americans are read, like those of Melba Pattillo Beals and Ida Mae Holland, where the works of Maxine Hong Kingston, who tells the story of alienation and segregation in school through the eyes of a Chinese child. African Americans were denied the right to vote and many other citizenship rights, but Chinese Americans were denied even the opportunity to become citizens. I'm not dismissing the issue of discrimination against Americans, or belittling the struggles they went through. I simply want to call attention to discrimination against other minority groups and their often overlooked struggles to achieve equality. So this is a really, really long statement of that, but they're giving you an idea of what they're going to be filling. And as you can see here, they're not saying that they're discounting one, that they're just trying to fill in the gap and show the ways in which not only have African Americans historically been marginalized and treated poorly in America, it has happened across, almost ubiquitously across race and ethnicities. It is, that's what he's trying to say, is he's trying to show a gap in knowledge. He's not he's just saying that there's something that's been overlooked and he's trying to add to that. There is the what they call the modifying what others have said model. This modification model of thesis writing assumes that mutual understanding is possible. For example, in proposing a change in policy, one student asserts that although scholars have claimed that the only sure way to reverse the cycle of homelessness in America is to provide an adequate education, we need to build on this work, providing school-to-work programs that ensure graduates have access to employment. So as you can kind of see here, he's not saying, he's modifying what other writers are claiming, that, and he's just suggesting that not education alone will solve the problem, that we need to go beyond that and looking at how to help put people in a position to find work after they've completed school. So he's not really so what he's doing is he's being he's in a constructive conversation with those with those whose work he wants to build on. So he's trying to build on the work of others who have looked at how education can help prevent homelessness. He's trying to build on that and show that other things need to be done, not just education. So he's trying to modify what others have said to come up with a solution to an agreed upon problem. The hypothesis testing method begins with the idea that you have good reasons for supporting your arguments, but there are also a number of legitimate reasons to explain why something is or is not the case. A long-winded way they talk about the hypothesis testing model is with global warming. That's a great one because we're not trying to say that there is only one cause of global warming. We're trying to figure out the causes of global warming, and these hypotheses testing models are different hypotheses as to what could be contributing most significantly to global warming. To say to say that it's only man-made or that it's only environmental response is trying to reduce the idea down to just one thing. But a hypothesis testing model is talking about multiple things that could possibly be true. Their example down here in the steps for following, some people explain A by suggesting B, but a close analysis of the problem reveals that the possibility of several competing complementary explanations such as C, D, and E. So that's what they're doing. The hypotheses method is saying it could be, some people explain global warming by suggesting that it's only man-made, and the close analysis says that it shows that it could be also this or this or this. So that would be the ways that you would want to be hypothesis testing. So you might be working in this if you're looking at the global warming, but for most of you might be modifying or gap modeling. Where are we here? We're going to go straight away. They have a couple of examples of establishing context. That's what we're going to next. Sorry. You want to establish context for a thesis by establishing the topic of conversation. You want to establish that the topic is current and relevant, that is on people's minds, or that it should be. You want to briefly summarize what others have said and how you're familiar with the topic of use. Explain what you see as a problem, misinterpretation, or gap, or a modification that needs to be made, and how others have addressed the topic or issue. And then you want to state your thesis at the end of the paragraph. We're going to just skip over. They have O'Neill read through this. It's a really great explanation of how to build. And as you can see, it is multi-paragraph. He is establishing what is relevant here in this first paragraph. Then he starts to begin to tell what others have said. He identifies the problem. Then way down here, he begins to argue his thesis. Where is it? He makes I argue that it is important to create programs that encourage parents, teachers, and students to think early about the cost of college and possibilities that exist to help children pursue a college degree. So as you can see, he did those 4 steps that you would usually do in your first paragraph or 2 in our shorter essays over 4 pages, and that's what you may have to do the more complex your essay gets. But a better example for you guys is going to be Chris Gutierrez is another long example. I'm going to skip over that. We're going to go to the shorter example because this is what you guys would typically be doing. Here is a shorter essay. So let's start with an opening paragraph. They say, as students walk into class each day, most do not notice that other people around them rather than talking with others, they are texting their friends. Okay, so first I should say this is about texting and literacy, as you can tell by the title. But they are texting their friends in the next building, in their dorm, or back home. Although social networking is the most common use for text messages, they are not used solely for socializing. While texting is a quick and easy way to keep up with friends, it threatens other aspects of our lives. When students spend time texting rather than focusing on those other important aspects, texting has become detrimental. Students' enjoyment of reading, their schoolwork, and their relationship with others are all negatively affected by text messaging. As you can see there, the student identifies an issue or problem, and then states her thesis as an evaluative claim that attempts to correct a misconception. As you can see, she is identifying the problem of texting becoming a consuming factor in our lives, and then she makes the evaluative statement that when spend time texting rather than focusing on those other important aspects of texting, texting becomes detrimental. Students' enjoyment of reading, their social schoolwork, and their relationships with others are all negatively affected by text message. As you can see, they've stated their thesis statement. They're probably going to talk about relationships with others, their reading, their schoolwork, their enjoyment of these things that are all suffering. They're kind of signaling what they're going to talk about in their essay in that thesis statement. Then you can see here that due to the mass appeal of text messaging, students pass their free time chatting through their cell phones rather than that. Rather than enjoying a great book. As you can see here, they are summarizing their research. They're placing the conversation that they're about to have in the larger context. Her citations also given that her citations indicate that the problem identified is relevant and timely. So these are all things that you would want to be doing, and then you would establish. And then she uses evidence to support her thesis down here. And that evidence is that we take for granted a mode of communication that has actually threatened the development of literacy. And then she refines her thesis even more that by first stating what people assume is true and then offering a corrective in the second part of her thesis, and this is that corrective. However, reading well is essential to being successful academically, although some argue that text messages force students to think quickly and allow them to formulate brief responses to question. Their habit is actually stifling creativity. So that's a secondary, more refined thesis that she is trying to argue here. And then she will make a secondary claim that is related to her thesis, and that because of text messages, students perceive writing as a fun way to communicate with friends and not as a way to strongly voice an opinion. Students no longer think of writing as academic, but rather consider it social. So that's another claim that she is making, that writing is going from an academic solely act to a social act, and that will influence how people view it, that sort of a thing. And then she elaborates on that claim to point out one of the detrimental effects of texting here, and she cites that by using another source. Then the student, if you look here, they present a possible counter argument, which is something you will want to be looking at. That and then she talks about here how the idea that a friend the reading and writing in shorthand can often affect how students type. The possible counter argument is that she uses an expert's idea that a possible counter argument would be that text messages increase literacy because a student must first know how to spell a word to abbreviate it in texting. So that's a possible counter argument to a point that she is bringing up as a possible problem, and that's something you can do if you have that research. And by coming into your research the way you did, of sort of just researching a question instead of having an argument in mind, hopefully you will have some of that sort of research going in your papers. And then she keeps going, and then she restates an evaluative claim that runs through the essay, like the skewer that you discussed early. The evaluative claim is that although that it is true that text messages have made conversation much simpler and faster, it has not improved communication. Texting may make it more convenient to stay in contact with friends, but it does not ensure that contact is as beneficial as talking in person. So this is that sort of skewer through the whole essay that she was talking about, how it affects the relationships with friends. And then she provides current research to support that thesis statement of that being online and interacting with people not face to face is detrimental. to people. Then she concludes by restating her premise about the value of reading and her evaluation of texting as a form of communication that erodes what she considers the very definition of literacy. So this is, this would be her conclusion here, that she is all the negative effects of text messaging additionally deteriorate literacy, the enjoyment of reading, leads to avid readers who eagerly absorb written words. So this would be a great little conclusion where she concludes with a claim which she proposed that students need to evaluate the way that they read and write. While students can passively text message their friends, they need to focus on reading to enjoy it. In order to really immerse themselves in the story, they need to use a higher level of thinking than that of texting. So as you can see there, she kind of lays out a lot of what she'd want to be doing, and we will talk about this in more depth, but this would be the sort of stuff you want to be doing, because she is, throughout the essay, she is establishing that the topic is current and relevant. She presents what others have said in the beginning. She explains what she sees as the problem, and then she states her thesis in the beginning, and then throughout she just kind of reiterates that thesis and follows that roadmap. And as I said, I'm not going to go too much depth into this, and hopefully this didn't get you guys confused and anxious, but this is where you should be heading next, and we will be talking about this more next week going forward, and like the rest of this week, as you have questions to start getting that ball rolling. Have a good night, and I will see you all when